Hey everyone, welcome to Love is a Business Strategy. This week we sit down with Soojin Jun. She shares a powerful story of personal loss and her deep desire to bring empathy back to every component of healthcare. We hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy. This is a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. As you know, we're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. Now, I'm your host, Jeff Ma. I'm just kidding. I'm Frank. I'm a director at Softway, but I'm not Jeff Ma. He's usually hosting. Today I'm hosting. It's no big deal. We are a business to employee solutions company that creates products and offers services that help build resilience and high performance company cultures. Today, I'm joined by Mohammed, Softway CEO. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello, Frank.
Hey, and Soojin Jun. And this is our special guest, and we are so excited that you're here with us today. And Soojin, I'd like to introduce you really quickly. You are a voice for voiceless patients in healthcare. You're a believer in empathy, you're a pharmacist, and you're a patient advocate. And you're also a Medium writer. So you own a Medium publication called I Am Cheese, where you share healthcare stories with the vision of empathetic healthcare. So welcome to Love is a Business Strategy.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Very excited, Soojin. So as per the usual, we start out our episodes with a little icebreaker question. And so today's icebreaker question is kind of healthcare centric, and I'm going to throw it at Mohammed first. So he gets to answer it and you get time to think about this. But Mohammed, this will be an easy question for you. Have you ever broken a bone?
Oh, plenty of times.
Plenty of bones. Okay. And how is the question? What's the juiciest story around breaking a bone?
Ooh, okay. The one story is from high school. I used to go to a college prep school where I lived in the dorms. And so in the cafeteria, we had like milk and food and, all of the stuff. So I one time took 2 cartons of milk for dinner time, and I got in trouble at the school for taking 2 cartons of milk instead of 1.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to go see the dorm master, who then punished me with giving me work detail, meaning now I had to vacuum the floors of the dorm and clean the toilets and things like that because I broke the rule of 1 carton of milk. So I got really upset and angry, and I punched the wall and I broke my hand. And
wow.
After that, it became a big joke in the school, and I was told by people passing in the hallways, "Hey Mo, I think you may have calcium deficiency. You should drink more milk." And they would just pick on me after that because of that. So that was my story, like how I broke my hand punching the wall, and it became the joke of the thing to where it made it to the yearbook as my future predictions as I move into a house with padded walls, all kinds of things. It was pretty intense. But yeah, that's my story of breaking bones.
Listen, first of all, I've never heard that before. And second of all, it looks like you were trying to prepare. You knew what was best for your body. The quote unquote milk is better for bones. I think that's been debunked. But anyway, so Soojin, what about you? Have you ever broken a bone?
I think I have, but I don't really remember the details. It was when I was little. I think I was doing like a running race, and it broke my arm. That's the only detail I remember. Otherwise, I don't think I've ever broken a bone afterwards.
I think Mohammed's broken bones for everybody here on the call. So for me, it wasn't really a broken bone. It was more of an ankle like fracture. I was jumping on a trampoline and I was 11 years old, and I was double bounced, which, is when someone hits the trampoline in a certain way. And then I flew up really high, a lot of fun up in the air. But when I hit, my ankle kind of twisted a bit. And this was 2 weeks before I was taking an international trip to the Philippines. And so I was really freaking out because it was my first trip, to another place outside of the US, like an actual long distance trip. Luckily, it wasn't bad enough to not be able to go. but it hurt for a few days. And I think that's the closest I've gotten to a bone breaking, was just jumping on a trampoline. Nothing like punching walls or anything, but
okay.
Okay, we're good. Thank you for that icebreaker. And Soojin, I just want to start with you.
Was that a bone breaker or icebreaker? I don't know.
Oh my gosh. That's what we have to deal with every day. If you want to know what working at Softway is like, this is it right here. And it's amazing. It's an incredible environment. And Soojin, I want to start off with you and talk about your passion for what you do, the work that you do. And I want to, the first statement that I mentioned was that you are a voice for voiceless patients in healthcare. And I'd love for you to just start us down this path. Tell us the story of how you got to this place where you've arrived to be this patient advocate. I'd love to hear that story and dig into it a little deeper.
Sure. So this goes back about 13, 14 years ago when I was a caregiver for my father. I was a wedding videographer at the time, totally different from pharmacy.
Okay.
And my dad was diagnosed with cancer, esophageal stage 3 cancer. And on top of that, he also was diagnosed with diabetes afterwards. And I was relatively healthy. He was also until that diagnosis. We were very unfamiliar with healthcare system in the United States. We were from South Korea. And, although he was very fluent in English, still Korean was his primary language and English was his second language. But he had no issues with communicating in everyday language. But when it came to healthcare, it was very different. And I didn't know what to expect, and he didn't know what to expect, I think. As we go from doctor to doctor, because he has an oncologist, his primary doctor, and he was in hospital for a month for a G-tube placement and his therapies. And then he went into nursing home. Then he came to my home afterwards. So right there, even just in 1 minute, you can see how complicated the care can be. Mm-hmm. He had to be tested 5 times a day for his diabetes, for his insulin injection. He had 20 or so medications to take out. And, the combination of the trust that I put in healthcare and my dad's trust in healthcare, with these complex navigation that was present in healthcare, really gave detrimental outcomes. He was not getting better. He had 2 emergency visits for low sugar that can be caused by insulin. So this is anyone who has insulin, by the way, on their medication therapy can have low blood sugar at any time of their therapy, no matter how well it's managed. So if you have diabetic relatives or family members, this is so important for you to know, because they can just go low sugar and lose consciousness. But anyway, because of all these things that was happening, my dad was just so disappointed and wanted to get care in South Korea, where he would get cheaper care and more comprehensive, because a lot of preventative care and a lot of the cost for healthcare is covered by the country. So we were all ready to go. I couldn't let my dad go by himself. So our whole family booked our flight. We were all ready to go. And 1 week before our flight, he passed away.
Wow.
So in fact, today is his birthday. Yeah. And whenever I have to talk about this experience, it just brings me the memory of how sad and angry I was. And I felt like I had to do something so that no other people go through what I've gone through or what my dad has gone through. So at the time I was considering career change, and I was always I wanted to be a doctor before I decided to go into art, and I wanted to pursue something in healthcare. So I decided I was kind of contemplating different options, and pharmacy came to mind because how he passed away with insulin, and I felt pharmacists would be a perfect bridge between patients and doctors in healthcare. So it took me about 9 years to complete the pharmacy school because I was raising 2 little kids at the time. So I was going part-time for my prerequisites, and I did 4 years of pharmacy school. So it took me longer than a lot of other people, but I made it, and I don't know how I did it because it was really, really tough. I slept like 3 hours a day, and that was like the entire duration of the process while I was completing the courses. And so I became a pharmacist, and after I became one, I started practicing, and I realized the pharmacy was just a very little piece of the whole puzzle. And, just taking care of medications was not really solving the problem for patients. And I've got to know so many patients who are even, their English is their primary language, they would still get hurt, and they would still, not be properly apologized by the healthcare system. And this is happening every day, every moment in this country. They're leading cause of death next to heart disease, and cancer is arguably medical error. Yeah. I know there is a negative connotation into the word error, but I would argue it could possibly be number one because there's no way to measure this number. No one's really measuring it the way it should be. And if you count the omissions and count the cases like in my dad, where miscoordination just results in not optimal outcome, then I would say it could possibly be number one. And as I encounter these patients, and so many minority patients who have second languages don't even have means to bring what they experience to anywhere. And there are even like in the judicial system, many lawyers don't take patient cases if they can't see themselves winning the cases. And even if they take the cases, they stop supporting the patient because it takes decades sometimes, or many times, to get to the conclusion, and a lot of patients end up losing anyway. So there's not many voices. I realize there aren't that many voices for these patients, and I decided to be one. And that is why I started the Medium publication to to accept any patient stories in any language. And I have some volunteer editors who translate these stories. So all can learn, and not just the patients and caregivers, but I strongly believe healthcare systems can learn from these stories. And that I realized after I became a pharmacist, as much as I advocate for empathy for patients, I realized healthcare professionals need empathy as much as patients, because we are constantly pressed to work harder, and and the healthcare systems don't give us enough room to have empathy. And this is a misconception that a lot of people have, that you can just kind of demand empathy and you'll get it, right? And the answer is no. You need to give a space. You need to give a moment of breath for these healthcare professionals, so they can have a room for empathy for patients. They need to be able to take care of themselves before they can have empathy for patients. So this is the path that I've taken, and realized how empathy needs to be supported in healthcare in order for patients to be heard, but also healthcare professionals to be heard.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing, Soojin. That was really, I appreciate you sharing that. I think there are many folks out there who have, similar stories or experiences, having gone through, loved ones or family members, through these healthcare type scenarios. So if you don't mind, if you're willing to share, like, I know you touched a part of, like, English is not their first language, or it's their second language, and minorities or cultural differences. Would you be able to give examples from the stories that you've heard and learned from, about how it could become an impediment in delivering healthcare, or what you've seen from the stories where there is that lack of empathy, as some examples for us to discuss?
So, as I was participating in a conference where it's a CE an organization. It's called ACCME, and I was attending the conference as an advocate. So there were full of people who were executives and educators, and and I'm not a racist, first of all, so I want to give that as a background. But this is a room full of people who are white male, and I was given a chance to talk about what I'm supporting as a patient advocate. And this was very new. Like, embedding patient advocates in conferences was very new concept, and they were kind of experimenting this. So I volunteered for this position, and I was selected to be participant. And as they were experimenting this concept, they wanted to hear from the advocates. So I, brought the issue of the minority patients, and there was one gentleman who shared the story of a Japanese patient who was seeking help through like a electronic health record system. So you can message the doctor through like something called like MyChart, or there are these tools in healthcare that kind of facilitate emailing or messaging your doctor. So this Japanese patient was trying to get help for his coughing and condition that he was experiencing, but English was his second language. So his English was not perfect, but he was pushed to use this tool when he requested to talk to the doctor. So he was kind of using that, but because of his English, it wasn't, it didn't sound urgent. It didn't communicate the context very well. So the doctor did not really think of it as something very significant. And, the doctor told the Japanese patient to seek urgent care, and really did not have a chance to fully have a proper interaction with the patient. And then the patient, I guess, it's in this case probably didn't think it was that serious, because possibly because of the interaction, but I don't really know the whole story. But from what the gentleman shared, the Japanese patient ended up having pneumonia and passed away. So I talk about this in an article that I wrote on Medium, because a lot of patients get pushed to use digital health more and more. And this context, although we can't really say digital health was a contributing, the contributing factor for the death, this is very common practice. I guess it can even apply to any patient who are not able to verbalize or properly communicate what they're experiencing in English. It can very well be English-speaking patient, like 90-year-old, patient who can't really use computer, or it doesn't really necessarily have to be English as second language patient. But this case was such case. So I was able to have that conversation with that executive. But when I bring up something like this kind of topic, some people would like roll their eyes, in front of me. And, I'm not sure, they don't really share verbal comments, but, it can possibly be either they don't empathize with what I have to say, or I've seen some practitioners saying, "Oh, there's an interpreter; they can take care of that," But when it comes to chronic disease, interpreter is not the answer a lot of times, and because first of all, you don't get a same interpreter every time, and the patient has to repeat the whole story every time if they get different interpreter. And, when it comes to chronic disease, that can be very exhausting for caregivers and patients. And even without the interpretation, patients always complain about repeating the same thing over and over to different providers and practitioners. So imagine how that can be difficult for patients who have English as second language. And these kind of things don't even get into the topics very well. This is more like a second thought for a lot of executives. And that I think really needs to change as we, the healthcare in the United States are expanding to other parts of the world now, and people who are living in the United States can be living in other countries who have other languages as a primary language. The term minority is a very fluid term. You can be minority in any type of setting, not just a language, right? You can be, I know Frank talked about in the book, the book that you guys wrote, having like an imposter syndrome about his education and things like that. You can identify yourself as a minority in any type of setting.
Yes.
That's a constant. We constantly assess that as a human being. It's a human behavior, not necessarily because you are a minority or majority. It doesn't matter. It's something that we do as a human. So the healthcare language, I feel, needs to focus how we are human, more than is this majority issue, minority issue. And this is something that I realized as I became aware of, perfectly, the patients who are perfectly able to bring the topics that they care about, get ignored. They simply get ignored, and it's a very sad reality that we live in. And I also say this, that unless our healthcare can heal itself, we cannot heal. We cannot have a healing environment for patients. They cannot be healed. So we really need to work hard on the culture. I know that's your company's, mission and passion.
Yes.
It is my passion too. Unless that changes, no matter how much you know about medications, it really does not make impact for patients' well-being.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I wanted
Yeah,
to ask.
sorry, go
Rob.
ahead. I was just going to say, like, patient safety and outcomes is, a really big healthcare outcome, right? Like everybody wants, every hospital system should aspire for improving patient safety and patient experiences. And some of them are even incentivized that way. But ultimately, I think, like you said, if the mindset and the behaviors of the staff, the population that are, providing these services inside our hospital systems, unless they have the ability to see everyone as human from an empathic lens, we can institute all types of technology solutions to bring about efficiency and, solutions to augment or enhance patient, care. But if you're missing that human component of empathy, it will reflect in even your technology advancements, your innovation, your processes. If you don't think from an empathic lens, you will see that miss out in your systems that you build, your processes you institute, your technology you institute in your organization in healthcare. So that's what I'm taking away from your conversation is, while it's not the technology's fault, which, we can attribute, like in the case of the teledoc, messaging communicator tool, it's not the technology was never built to look at the patient from the lens of the human aspect of, is this going to really be effective for all types of patients, English speaking, non-speaking, or old, or tech savvy and not tech savvy. So when these technology decisions are also being implemented or made, if at the end of the day, it's human at the end creating these technology decisions, building technology. If they have that empathy from the get-go, you will see it reflect in the technology as well. So I could see how there's a lot of room for improvement for systems to bring in more of those humanistic behaviors, even if it's technology and processes.
Yeah, and digital health is getting bigger every day. Now many companies have telehealth as their benefit, and it was helping us when we were having COVID. I mean, and it still is, it's still in pandemic, but it does help. But there are components that it needs to be constantly improved, and the feedback from patients needs to be honored somehow. But that process is like a second thought for a lot of companies. So, and especially when it comes to minority patients being able to provide feedback, do companies provide surveys in second language? Not that many.
Yeah.
I know there's Spanish for a lot of surveys, but what about other patients?
Right.
What are we doing with them? How are we making sure that these surveys are readable for these patients? And other than surveys, is there other ways to bring concerns? Surveys you get like after 2 months of your visit. Like, are you going to be able to remember what happened? No. And so there's a lot of things that's happening and get measured, but are we really measuring it the right way? That's a big question that a lot of organizations don't really ask. And they're just so busy, checking the checklist to see whether they're complying to what big organizations like Joint Commission and other healthcare like improvement and organizations that measure these things. Also like Medicare and Medicaid, they, I know Mo, you talked about incentivizing. And this is another aspect that a lot of patient advocates kind of pay close attention to, like how there's a growth of how organizations want to engage patients. So the term patient engagement is the buzzword out there, but it's a lot of times it's used improperly. It's not something that patient advocates hope to see, how these words get thrown to be used, because they're thinking of ROIs, how they can get payments, how to make patients to behave the way they want patients to behave so they can get paid. And this is the trend that I see, that and the patient advocates look closely to see whether organizations are engaging patients the way that patient advocates want to see that they engage. But this trend is really not the way that they like to see, or patients or caregivers want to see.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about those that are practitioners or clinicians in healthcare going, wow, there's a lot to think about here in regards to going beyond the surface and thinking that, are you crafting an experience so you end up getting the rating, so you get the funding, or are you crafting an experience that truly takes the actual patient experience into consideration? And and I think that's a great example. Another example, like you mentioned earlier, so simply, is how many translations or versions of your surveys are there in different languages, not just regionally, but also just considering that aspect. And actually, my question kind of follows that train of thought, which is, what are some of those practical ways that you've started to see that clinicians, that practitioners in this space can begin to bring more empathy into healthcare? What are some of those considerations for people that you recommend as a starting point, or as something that they can begin to integrate into the way that they serve the needs of the patients?
So in the chart, the medical chart is the way we communicate practitioner to practitioner. So a lot of doctors write notes, and these notes get transferred to different facilities and other practitioners. And, I think being culturally sensitive is very important.
Right.
And also knowing who takes care of what is very important, because many times patients with second languages have either their children or family members who take care of their stuff because of this language barrier. And when that is not recognized and honored, the communication is going to break down. And I guarantee 100%, all patients with language barriers have issues in their healthcare. I guarantee it. It's, perfectly, well-suited patients who may have PhDs. I hear these stories all the time. They still struggle. Because it doesn't matter. When it comes to language, it does matter. But then I feel the feeling and the pain of all patients, no matter what language they speak. But to focus on these patients who have second languages, there's no proper way to assess these things at the registration. They don't necessarily get asked what language they prefer. And there's sometimes, depending on which system the healthcare system uses, there's no proper way to record what language the patient speaks. So there's so many pieces in every aspect of interaction that I see that these patients will fall into cracks. So
right.
I'm just talking about the registration surface, right?
Yeah. Just the system they use already creates the inability for a clinician to be able to operate in a way that brings more humanity, right? So it's like just the first interaction with a tool that is not designed to connect human to human, it puts the clinician at a disadvantage.
Yes. And that's, if we just pass over that surface and, the interaction that, happens with the doctor, and let's just give an example about this cultural, we all have implicit bias, and this is very prevalent in healthcare as well. And this happens both ways. So I've heard from patients, that, when the cultural differences are not understood, there's a barrier of like not being able to be completely open, not being able to be understanding what the other party is saying. I've heard from clinicians as well when the difference is so big, they can't really go further down than like what they can just see or do with diagnostic testing. So there's a huge barrier right there. And this is something that I bring also, that this is why a lot of patients who are minorities seek providers who have same ethnic background, even if that provider does not know the language, because in a hope to be understood better. And that is the ultimate goal of patients. They want to be understood when they present with their symptoms. But, now the doctor's appointment lasts 15 minutes, maybe even less. And, and there are these different pieces right there too, right? PAs and nurse practitioners, they see patients under the supervision of the doctors. So, but then is this helping? Is this helping to create the trust, to create the bond between the doctor and patient? So there's a lot of moving pieces in there in the every interaction that patients go through in healthcare. And even after the patient visits the doctor, when you go to the pharmacy, you get a prescription that's written in your language, no? Is there a person who they can talk to comfortably? And these pharmacists are processing hundreds of prescriptions without breaks. How can healthcare really be helpful for these patients? Patients get lost. And you think about it in terms of if you're 90-year-old gentlemen who have no one to help around, and sometimes now, even college who have to take care of these things, they don't really know. I mean, they've never had interaction with healthcare system without parents, right? So, I mean, it's not just elderly, it's not just younger patients, it just affects everyone in some way.
Right.
And every piece of these interactions, if when it compounds, it's a whole thing. And patient is only one person who experiences these different interactions. And who's assessing the whole process, the patient experience? I mean, I know there is more movement out there, but if that patient cannot verbalize or communicate the way they want to, then who's assessing? Who's responsible? Who's in charge?
Yeah.
Is patient in charge? These questions, we really need to ask harder questions. We need to really look into, the system very, very carefully. And the whole interaction that patient experiences through, we really need to look hard to see how we can help patients. And healthcare professionals, I want to emphasize that too, because health systems and also patients want empathy from healthcare professionals, understandably.
Mm-hmm. I
totally get it. And that was me too. I was a caregiver who wanted that. But as I became healthcare professional now, it's really hard to have empathetic spirit when they go into these interactions, because doctors are pressed to see more patients in shorter time. Pharmacists are pressed to process more prescriptions, and that's how they measure the performance. When I said, I don't get lunch break, people said, is that even legal?
Right. That sounds like it's not.
And legally, we are supposed to, but we don't necessarily get it. And so this goes to that, all healthcare professionals. Sometimes we don't have time to take breaks. And nurses, how many patients do they take care of per their shift? They usually do 12-hour shifts. They walk 3 miles. And who's looking at these things and say this is really affecting our patient care, not the bottom line? They look at bottom line first.
Yes.
They don't look at humans first. So how
Agreed.
can healthcare be healing environment? It cannot be.
And this is where I think, Soojin, there's the alignment with, what we've been talking about is if you want to really improve patient safety, patient experience, it starts with building a culture for your staff. building a cultural environment for the clinicians, and investing into giving them that ability to be human, right? And the systems are so structured in such a way, like they're measured by how many patients they're able to see at a time, how the shifts can be maximized, how can we get the most efficiency, how can we get the most billability, and how can we check off the box or get the survey to be a certain rating just so we get a remuneration, but not really looking at genuinely enhancing the patient experience. But let's figure out how to train our clinicians to get the highest level of score by really teaching them how to get that score, right? And we're not really looking at building an environment where these clinicians deserve to be themselves, be human. If they can't even be human themselves, how can we expect them to look at others as humans, right? So many a times the systems that are built and designed are not allowing clinicians and the staff and the healthcare providers to even have empathy if they want to be empathetic, right? It's not, they're not incentivized for it. They're not given the space for it. Let alone they're not even allowed to be human in their own way. So how can we expect that empathy to be carried forward to patients? So I think ultimately there's a lot to be talked about: cultural competency, cultural integrations, and culture at a workplace like a healthcare system, where we need to really consider starting with creating empathy for the staff and each other. That's the only way we can see it extend to patients. So
yes, definitely.
Well said. And I as I was listening to this and kind of walking through this process, and thank you for sharing that end-to-end spectrum. I know that there are a lot of other nuances, but you being able to walk us through someone checking in all the way through, receiving medication and all those elements. I kept hearing over and over again that love truly equals understanding. Like, humans want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be felt.
Right.
And the more that we can be seen and be heard and be felt, the more it creates an opportunity to be more empathetic. And what I'm hopeful of is that our listeners and the folks that are watching are able to feel some of that urgency around recognizing areas in their lives that they can bring empathy to the people that they interact with. And I think that's a powerful gift you've given everyone, to be honest with you, because even in reflecting, I'm not a healthcare professional, but even in reflecting on situations in my life that I need to slow down, that I need to recognize the stories of others. I need to understand and see and listen to understand to other people. I think that's a valuable tool. So Soojin, I want to thank you for what you've shared today, and ask if you have anything else to share before we wrap. I'd love to be able to close.
Yeah, so I told you today's my dad's birthday.
Yeah.
And the last moment of his death, where I really felt he showed empathy. And it was more like a precursor of how I advocate for empathy now. So, we were in the emergency department and he was vomiting blood. And there was a nurse that I can't remember her name, but she was giving my dad a painkiller. And my dad said in a very inaudible voice, with all his might, "Thank you" to that nurse. And that was his last word. He did not have chance to say anything else to me or my brother. And that's what he did. And the nurse that she almost like hugged my dad's head and said, "Oh, you're not at the place to say those things. I don't have to be thanked."
Wow.
And she was very touched about that. So that moment really taught me a lot of things. I know it's hard for patients to be able to do that, but my dad did, and he was such a person all throughout his life. The magic happens. The magic of empathy happens when we are able to be thankful, even at the last moment, even when it's so hard. And I wanted to share that story because it gave me a realization that empathy is possible in healthcare. And I know it's hard for patients to have that kind of moment all the time, but when they do, and this is a power that patients have, and that's why I wanted to bring it to the podcast, and say, when you're able to, and that's the patient's power that they can practice in that interaction, in the interaction, all the interactions that I explained, and the patients should not forget that power and practice that. It's the magic can happen, and healthcare professionals are humans too, that they chose those professions for a reason, to take care of patients. But we do get tired, and we don't get the breaks and breath that we need to have that empathy in our hearts, because we can't take care of ourselves. So when patients bring that realization up front, healthcare professionals will be able to remember and resonate with patients. So I wanted to share that the patients have these powers, and not to forget to bring that forward.
Soojin, thank you for sharing that. Could you share with us your father's name?
His name is Gain Lee.
Well, we're very thankful for him. And we're thankful for your time today and what you shared. And we want to honor him on his birthday as well. And just say thank you for telling that story. That's very powerful.
Agreed.
And I'm very thankful that you were willing to share that. And wow. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we appreciate it very much. And as always, I want to say thank you to our listeners. Please be sure to check out the book. I know, Soojin, you're reading our book right now, and I'm so thankful for that. That's awesome that you're reading it and you're enjoying it. And it is available to purchase on Amazon and everywhere else you might find books. And you can check it out at loveasabusinessstrategy.com. If you're wondering what the book title is, if you're listening to this podcast, which is called Love as a Business Strategy, that's a big hint. And you'll receive more information there, as well as free resources. I do want to say as well that Soojin's Medium publication is called I Am Cheese. So feel free to go and follow, clap, because that's what we do on Medium, is we clap for articles. And you have to follow, read her content. It's incredible stuff, and it's powerful to help build empathy and an emotional connection to the stories that she's trying to tell. And here at Love's a Business Strategy, we're posting new episodes every Wednesday. So if there's a topic that you'd like to have us cover, please let us know. You can do that by visiting softway.com/LAABS. And if you liked what you heard today, please do leave us a 5-star review. It's very helpful in helping new people find our podcast and the stories we're sharing, and subscribe on Apple and Spotify. If you know someone who might enjoy this storytelling, might enjoy this podcast, don't forget to share the love as a business strategy, pun intended. Soojin, I want to say thank you again. I know I've said that a lot, but I really appreciate your perspective, your stories, and being willing to bring your father's story to our conversation today. And we just, again, appreciate your time on this podcast so much. But We hope to see and hear you all next week on Love as a Business Strategy.